so we'll get this recorded. You're going to get some great information today. Once again, send out a quick text to anyone that has not joined us yet to make sure that they can get on, because this is information that is different than the ones we've done before. This is information, so you're going to meet the incredible team at the corporate part of Immunotech, your partners in your success. And so at this point, I'm going to hand the call over to my good friend down in Dallas, Texas, to Mr. John Solider. Hello, John.
Hello, Keith, and everyone else, and welcome. It's a glorious fall day in Dallas, finally. We actually have some fall weather. I was sharing with Foster this morning. I got zero sympathy because he told me it was 7 degrees where he was. So I was complaining it was 50 here. So, yeah, and Suzanne, I know it's snowing in Saskatchewan. So anyway, here we go. So welcome, everybody. So, today's going to be an interesting day. They're all interesting. Hope you had your exercise this morning. I did. If you looked on Facebook, had a powerlifting meet this morning. So kind of started off the day right with some steel in my hands. And maybe you took your run or your walk or your bike ride, Tom Aldershaw, or your yoga or your Pilates or your tennis game or whatever it is that you want to do to keep yourself healthy, not only now, but always, and certainly during this pandemic. Our health is more important, frankly, than it's ever been. But you know that already. So I don't want to waste your time. I want to tell you some things that I think are interesting. The first gentleman that we're going to have speak today has been part of Immunotech before there really was an Immunotech. He was one of our 3 founders of the company, and we're blessed that he's still a viable part of this, deals with our researchers around the world. So I'm going to bring my good friend, Mr. John Molson, on the call. Welcome, John. John's muted. Can somebody unmute John, please? There you go. Hey, John. Hi, John. How are you?
Blame Keith Hooper for that.
I blame Keith Hooper for everything. I've even got my wife blaming him for everything now. It's not working that well, but anyway. John, how are you today?
Good. I worked out as well.
What did you do this morning?
Too much. About 3 or 4 hours.
I told Keith I came back after lifting, and we had a little meet this morning locally here that I participated in, and I came back and I said I'm going to have 8 Contra Lenta and 4 Immunical Platinum before this call because Grandpa's a little sore. But anyway, so John, we've been doing this together a long time, and we've got a lot of people on the call here who've been doing this a long time, but we've also got a lot of new folks. And over these last now 4 months, we've had the opportunity for you to interview some of the leading researchers on Immunical. So, as you've interviewed them and asked them questions, if we could start out, from your standpoint, reference points people can use from those calls. And let's start out with our own Dr. Kongshaven, because, let's go back to the beginning of the company, if you will, 1975. And of course, Patricia's still going strong here in her late 80s. Thank the good Lord. But at the end of the day, your thoughts about Dr. Kongshaven, if you had to give reference points that the people on the call could utilize when they're discussing Immunical from your talk with Dr. Kongshaven, what would those points be?
Well, it's one important point that stood out to me, and it was a fascinating interview for me to hear. Even after all these years of working with her and working with Dr. Bunos, that before Immunotech was Immunotech, the underlying motivation to conduct the research was as simple as, I hope this research results in helping the ordinary person. So you had the mission statement of Immunotech developed before the company, was even a glint in somebody's eye. And that was my motivation every day going to work. So for me to hear that again was really important. And, this company is about many things, but I think the fact that you have these type of people who represented so much could be working for such a simple purpose, I think says everything about the company back then and today.
Great. And When we segue from, Dr. Kongshaven, who actually, was the other researcher with Dr. Bunos, the key researchers to Immunical, and we kind of come fast forward here into the 2000s and the last, 10 years or so that this gentleman's been working with us. Dr. Linsman, all the research he's done with TBIs are really breakthrough stuff. I had another kid here that got concussed this week playing football that we just put on the product, for example, based on the chat Dr. Linsman gave, you know what I mean? For my knowledge base, even though I've been doing this a long time, I learned so much from listening to him that day. Once again, John, reference points from Dr. Linsman's chat.
So the most important reference points that you have to think about, and this is, again, Dr. Linsman was instrumental in helping us build our portfolio and understanding how Immunical acts in the brain. The lesson we learned very early on is that while you may raise glutathione in the blood, that doesn't necessarily mean you're impacting it in the brain. And so we didn't know Immunical could impact cerebral glutathione until Dr. Linsman's work. But collaborating with Dr. Linsman and Dr. Schipper, this simple concept that I asked Dr. Schipper, if we can increase glutathione in the brain, does that say something about improving the resiliency of the brain to all these different insults that the brain would be subjected to? And the simple answer is yes. So all of Dr. Linsman's work is pretty much based on exposing brain cells and these small animals to inflammatory insults. And we showed that Immunical performed extraordinarily well in all these experiments to protecting the cells, protecting the brains of these mice to these different types of inflammatory insults. And this is exactly when we talk about, the causes of dementia, the causes of Alzheimer's, all these different things. A big part of that is inflammation. So when we talk about improving the brain's resiliency to these different things, that's the big takeaway, is we've shown that in our experimental work, as well as we have this study set up now with the Montreal Jewish Hospital, the memory clinic, as well as the neuro, to look at the same thing in MCI patients, whether restoring glutathione in these MCI patients can affect their behavior. So it's very, very important work.
And John, then of course we went to Dr. Nathan Lewis, and wow, was he eye-opening in terms of the effects on Immunical on not only what we might consider age-appropriate athletes, right, young people, but certainly some of what they're doing with Immunical in conjunction with some of the older athletes in the NBA and professional soccer and some of the other sports in the world. You want to shed some light on that and some reference points on Dr. Lewis?
So John, I don't have to explain this to you because you already understand this. That, when you design clinical work, you have these questions that you're essentially asking, and that's a protocol is formulating the right questions that you're asking the product. Can the product answer these questions? And so the initial questions we looked at in 2 performance studies was exactly that. Does Immunical impact performance? But what we learned collaborating with Oracle and with Dr. Nathan Lewis is, they work with athletes across multiple disciplines all over the world. So all of a sudden we had, besides the performance impact, we were also getting feedback on many other aspects of how Immunical affected these athletes. And the most important one is, you may have a very important athlete, but if this athlete is injured all the time or gets injured or is very susceptible or gets broken down, then, you're not really achieving anything. So what we learned through Nathan Lewis was the importance of maintaining normalized antioxidant levels in the blood, and how when you get changes, when you get, let's say, for instance, low glutathione in the blood, this can up the risk of illness and injury. So this famous expression in the NFL and any other pro sport, are you available, or are you, in the ice tub or you on the bench because you can't perform. So a big part of this, and what we now know from Immunical, and the way Dr. Brian Moore explained it to me, Immunical increases the resiliency of these athletes to all these different insults, or whether it's training insult, all these different stressors. So we understand the performance aspect, but it also bolsters their capacity to deal with all the different training environments and traveling, et cetera, and keeps them healthy. So that to me was the big takeaway from Dr. Lewis.
Agreed. It was, it was so eye-opening to listen to somebody who deals with the elite athletes in the world, who are such a, small minority of the population. But, one of the things that I took from what he said is, of course, the correlation. Well, if it works well for, this NBA player or this professional soccer player or this Olympian, well, what's it going to do, for me as a 59-year-old guy that still, beats up his body on a regular basis? Or what's it going to do for my kids? Or what's it going to do for my, maybe my grandmother who's in her 70s or 80s, and I think a lot of people got that point from that chat that Dr. Lewis and yourself did. And John, Dr. Corrales, I thought he similar to Dr. Lewis, but different because of what he does. And what would the reference points be from Dr. Corrales' chat?
Yeah, so we were very, very fortunate to be able to attract one of the world experts in what's called redox physiology, so oxidation reduction. Dr. Wolf Droog, who came from the German National Cancer Institute, was a fellow at the Max Planck Institute, was a professor at Harvard, and one of the world experts in aging, unhealthy aging. And so Dr. Droog came to Canada with the intent of continuing his research. And when he arrived here, one of his major projects that he wanted to explore was how Immunical affected the aging process. And so we designed a study, and we were looking at 65 to 80-year-olds, and we were very fortunate to find a partnership with Dr. Corrales and his group at a French university in Montreal, because we've done a lot of work with the English university. And Dr. Droog studied unhealthy aging, and this saying that we have called the Droog syndrome is actually coined after his work, which is if you look at the blood of overtrained athletes, cancer patients, AIDS patients, and somebody who is not aging well, they all exhibit similar parameters. And what you see in these patients is cachexia, or muscle mass loss. And typically he explained that, you see this go in the legs, and that causes people to become unstable, and they have falls, and that's why you see elderly people breaking their hips and so forth. So the opposite of that, healthy aging, we wanted to explore and see how Immunical impacted muscle strength in the elderly population. And so we designed a study where we had roughly 100 participants, one on placebo, one group on Immunical, put them through the same set of resistance exercises. And lo and behold, the Immunical group had a 10% premium in terms of the 10% incremental benefit versus the placebo group. And this is very, very important. And Dr. Corrales talked about, how important that is in terms of the health trajectory of people. And, if you think life as an athletic event, life is all about movement and being able to do the activities you want to do, not just in the fourth decade, but fifth decade, sixth decade of life. And, think of COVID, where seniors are becoming more restricted in terms of their ability to exercise, to move. And so this is having a huge impact. So being able to give, our grandmother, our grandfather, our parents, Immunical to aid in that retention of muscle and build muscle is very, very important. So to me, part of this study was the athletic performance aspect, but more importantly, it was the impact on healthy aging.
And it's interesting because I was speaking to a friend of mine yesterday down in Orlando who's turning 65 this month, who just started to use our product, and known this person for, 30 some odd years. And, we're all getting older, I don't need to tell you all that. We all know that, right? And it's like, 60s, your 60s can now be your new 40s if you're taking the right stuff and you're eating right and you're exercising. It's changed. 60-year-old person, 65-year-old person, when many of us were kids, was generally an older person. Today, you got 60-plus-year-old people doing phenomenal things athletically and otherwise that aren't even blinking because their license says 60 plus. So, I know the rest of the world wants to do that. So along those lines of questioning, John, you've been doing this now for 25 plus years. You're in the gym a lot. I know you're around, world-class athletes, professional athletes, including your son, and you're in and out of locker rooms and that sort of thing. A tremendous amount of people in the sports world and the training world. What's the major point of difference, in your opinion, after 25 years of working with this, that makes Immunical the product of choice that everyone should make? If they cannot afford any other product, why should they be on Immunical instead of ABC product?
Well, I'd start with our scientific pedigree. Bill Gates and Paul Allen changed the computer industry. Well, Dr. Kongshaven and Dr. Bunos changed the whey protein industry. So if you think Dr. Bunos was the first to publish in the medical literature on whey protein and glutathione, then you had one of the top immunologists in the world collaborating with him, setting up the experiments. And then we were, very fortunate to get Dr. Droog, who was the first to study glutathione in a living organism. That to me is the starting point, is, who's behind the company? If you say, we're starting a computer company, it'll be XYZ versus we have Bill Gates and Paul Allen. It's a totally different starting point. So we were very fortunate in terms of our starting point was different than any other company out there. He changed the whey protein industry. The whey protein industry was totally focused on nutritional aspects. They discovered something else, and the development path was all geared towards that and changed the industry forever. And they were the first to start it, and that's our history. And that's, to me, is unique.
It's amazing, John, because, you and Dr. Gutman have given me personally so much tremendous education over these 20 plus years we've worked together. And, I try to pass that along all the time. And, one of the things that I kind of think in my brain is always how to take this complexity of Immunical, all this science for 45 years. And how do I make that simple for the truck driver, the school teacher, the person who doesn't know anything about nutrition perhaps. And I talked about the product. And one of the things that's come as a result of these talks, starting with Dr. Kongshaven and the other docs and yourself and Dr. Gutman, is just a simplification where I say, if you think of the wheel on your car or on your bicycle, and, you went to the center of it, right? Dead center. And you said Immunical should be in the dead center of any nutrition program if you're serious about your health and longevity, right? And all the spokes of the wheel can be, you're running or you're walking or you're eating your vegetables and your fruits and, your good diet and, clean, breathing clean air, drinking clean water, all those other good things that we all agree go along with being healthy. But Immunical always at the center point. I'd like you to comment on that and add to it if you desire.
Yeah, well, the second point of my my talk in terms of the key differences, I would also say that, the scope of our scientific portfolio, that if we again bring the computer analogy in here, a lot of companies are still trying to figure out MS-DOS, and, we're on Windows 10. If you look at the scope of our in vitro, in vivo, and clinical research, the way to understand that is, these research experiments build on each other. And so it's the accumulated knowledge over a 45-year period versus a company coming out and saying, well, we've run one research experiment and we've shown in cells that our product increases glutathione by 25 or 30%, whereas we've run many of those things. We've moved to from research on the brain to performance physiology, and so the scope and breadth of that science portfolio again is unmatched in the industry. And my last point, in terms of a differentiation point, is another way to look at this scientific portfolio. It's an independent quality control process. So over 45 years, we've had 45 years of publishing data, again, on the cells, in animals, in humans, where we've demonstrated repeatedly that Immunical demonstrates clinical significance. And so that says something about the product quality, because you're going from batch to batch to batch. You're seeing similarities in those batches, so the results aren't changing. So your product is working, it's working consistently, and it's worked like that over 45 years and continues to work. Whereas that's, that's hard to say for many other companies, where you read about these companies, who athletes take the product, they test positive or something. You don't know what's in the product. You don't know if it works. You don't know how it's made. And, not only do we do our own internal testing, but we publish this data in the medical literature. So that, again, is 45 years of proof of consistency of performance. So if you take those three things together, the scientific pedigree, the scope of the science portfolio, and then, this product performance over that 45-year period, I challenge you to find another company that does that.
There isn't one in network marketing, I can assure you of that, John.
Right.
That's for sure. And there's some that have been around that long, but their products have nowhere near that validity. But, John, I want to thank you so much, both personally and collectively, as a result of, all these people are on this call today and the thousands that aren't, because, both you and Dr. Gutman have been such a key cog in the wheel of us building this brand over these 25 years. And John and Dr. Gutman, both of them are extremely responsive if you have a question. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to answer your question above anybody else's. They get, multitudes of questions. But if you wanted to write to John, okay, his email address is J for John, Molson, Molson, okay, at immunitech.com. All right. And if you want to ask him a question from time to time about our research, okay, about anything that has to do with Immunical, he and Dr. Gutman, there's no two sources on the planet that exist today. Well, besides Dr. Kongshoven, but you can't write to her. but there's no two people on the planet besides Dr. Kongshoven living that know more about what this product does and the science associated with it than those two gentlemen. So, John, once again, I want to thank you. And any last comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, that Dr. Buenos spent years coaching me and teaching me. And so part of my mission is to pass on to all of you what he taught me. And so I'm very happy to do that. So feel free to write me if you have questions. I'm very happy to support all of your businesses.
Great. Thanks again, John. And, as we segue to Dr. Gutman, John mentioned Dr. Wolf Droga. And Dr. Droga is the gentleman that took Immunical, added to it, and created our platinum product. And he mentioned that Dr. Droga had been a Max Planck fellow. Now, some people know who Max Planck is. I didn't. I'll be honest about it. First time I ever heard his name, I didn't know who he was. Well, he was the mentor to a gentleman by the name of Albert Einstein that I'm sure you all have heard of, to give you an idea of the level of intelligence that created our Immunical platinum product. The guy was mentored, or he received an award, named for Albert Einstein's mentor. So not too many people on the planet can make that statement. So, hey, perfect segue for another guy who is extremely bright, extremely articulate. You all know him, and that's our own Dr. Jimmy Gutman. Dr. Gutman, where are you?
I'm right here, John. How are you?
I'm great, Doctor. How are you today?
Very, very good. I got to tell you, don't you just love speaking of Molson?
Both of you guys, I have to say, and I'm being, this is in earnest. We fool around a lot when we're on private calls and stuff, but both of you guys have been such a blessing with the way that you've represented this product, with what it does. And frankly, when people get off track and want to make erroneous claims for what it doesn't do, to keep this clean and legitimate for 25 years. And you two guys have been principled and had integrity throughout those years. And frankly, a lot of companies, they bring people in and will say whatever, get paid, and then they're down the road a year or two later, you guys have had integrity from day one, and you continue to this day with how you've represented this brand. And I know everyone on this call and everyone that's not on this call appreciates that, including the ownership and management of the company. So
thank you, John. I got to tell you, for Molson, integrity is easy. I mean, you just look at the world that he was brought up in and the major impact his whole family has had on an entire country.
Exactly.
Integrity is in John's genes. But just the wealth of fascinating stories that have been accumulated over 3 decades, and just listening to these recounts of his experiences with Bunos and Kongsheven and Droga. It's just, the kind of stuff you could sit around a fire and spend easily an entire weekend just smiling and soaking it in.
Well, Dr. Gutman, that leads me to my first question. Obviously a lot of your colleagues and friends in the medical world, people like yourself that have MD after their name, right? And now you've been around this for 25 years. How have the views of the medical profession as a whole in those years changed towards not only Immunical, but about people taking responsibility for their own health that take a product such as Immunical? How has that view changed over those last many years?
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting question, and it makes me reveal a lot about the medical profession and myself. When I first started working on this whole project of glutathione, initially from my colleagues, it was met with shock and confusion. What is Gutman doing talking about natural products? So for a lot of them, it was surprising, but fortunately, I did have a rather strong relationship with many of them and a good reputation. And they said, well, look, it's Jimmy. Let's listen to what he has to say. And what I found was, for any of the MDs that actually opened up their mind for more than 5 minutes, they became really interested. See, because if you can speak to someone who knows science and who knows medicine and who knows research, and you tell them what we've done, well, it becomes self-evident that what we've done is really special. But these doctors and scientists need to take the 30 seconds to listen to it. But even today, not all of them are open to listening to anything that falls outside of their working paradigm. If it's not part of standards of care that you can't find in a textbook, then it's never pursued. Because remember, and especially in your country, the United States, if you wander outside of standards of care, then you open yourself up to litigation and problems. And so no one has the time and effort. I have to tell you, the most success that I've had with the scientific medical community has been when I speak to other researchers and I speak to chiefs of the department. And the reason is because those people actually have dedicated time for which they're paid to get this, listen and think. Okay, you see, when you speak to the average clinical physician, he or she gets to work usually early, probably an hour before the times that they have people booked so they can see the walk-ins. They spend an entire day struggling to see 30, 40, or even 50 people. They're exhausted at the end of the day, and they don't want any interesting patients. They want patients, here's a clear problem, here's a clear solution, here's a prescription, or here's what you need to do, goodbye, next. They don't want to hear anything interesting, and they don't really have the time to consider other strategies because they're concerned about their own survival, about getting through the day. So when we speak to physicians that are paid to think, it becomes a lot easier. When I'm invited to give grand rounds or to give a clinical conference, it's easy for me because I just show them what we have and they eat it up. So the key here is that we're trying to bring forward an idea brought through a natural product. And as a company, we don't have the billions of dollars that a large pharmaceutical company has. So getting the message out to physicians, putting advertisements in medical journals, sponsoring entire conferences of thousands of people, sending scores of people out onto the road to knock on doctors' doors and talk to them about their research or their product. We can't do it. So the only thing that we can do is speak to people through all of you out there. You are all our ambassadors. And we have to rely on our research. It's research, research, research. And that's how you're going to convince the medical community. And that holds true for the entire natural products industry. And that's to whom we serve as an example. So thanks for that question, John.
So Dr. Gutman, you know, you've worked with true icons in this area of glutathione, starting with, of course, Dr. Bunos and Dr. Kongshaven. If you had to summarize, and I know you got to summarize a boatload of information, right? But if you had to say, let's start with Dr. Bunos. What did Dr. Bunos teach you above all about glutathione that you've used in your many books that you've written, your many articles that you've written over the years? What were 1.2 points that you would say that you learned from Dr. Bunos?
John, I've been watching politicians on TV, so what I'm going to do is take your question and bend it so it suits my answer.
Okay. They're good at that.
Yeah. But what I'm going to do is I'm just, rather than just glutathione, let me just talk about Bunos, Kongshaven, and Droga, just in more general terms. It's just easier to talk in generalities, and it's probably a little tastier for our listeners. And I'll try to stick to 4 points for each. For Bunos, the man really had an open mind. He was open to ideas, and that's where his brilliance came from. He could work outside of the usual paradigm. He could work outside of the box. And that's why he stood almost alone in the 1960s and 70s and talked about natural proteins towards improving surgical patients. I mean, we all talk about natural products now, but back in the 60s and 70s, for a surgeon to talk about a natural product, took a chance of being called crazy. And a lot of people told him he was crazy. But he wasn't motivated by self-interest. He didn't care about the money. He didn't care about the accolades. His only raison d'etre was in the pursuit of scientific advancement. So he truly had noble goals. Dr. Kongshaven, what impressed me was her true love of science and love of nature and her curiosity of thought. You know, again, all of these are really important in being a great researcher. And her ability to explain things so well and so eloquently and with so much class. And this is what made her a great teacher. And she was always not just teaching, but always opening to listening, discussing, and correcting you. God knows she had to correct me a lot of times. Dr. Droog, an entirely different person. He was somebody with a absolute strict adherence to science and the scientific method. He was fastidious about details and clinical design. And what he made clear to me was the difference between good research and great research. See, you know, even when you look at professional athletes, you look at professional hockey players, everybody who plays in the NHL is a really good hockey player. They have to beat out thousands and thousands of other young kids who had the same dream. But there's only a handful of Ovechkins and Crosbys and Gretzky. They come around just a couple every generation. And he was that type of person. And he never overstated things. This is the thing. He never overstated things. He let the work speak for itself. And this is why he was so popular among the scientific elite. He was in the scientific elite. He was like Dr. Drobe, but not at all known to the general public because he spoke at a level that was only attainable after a lot of effort and learning. So he was creme de la creme. I think that's what I learned from those three.
Great answers. And Doctor, last question on this. Okay. Your knowledge of GSH or glutathione has certainly changed from, when our good friend Howdy McDaddy, your patient, came in your office, threatened you with your life if you didn't read the material all weekend, as only Howdy can. And some of you know Howdy, you know what I'm talking about. Howdy's a rough guy, great guy. But, how's that changed? 25 years. I mean, you become the world's leading authority on this subject. Number one, and number two, how has it changed you and your thought process about your own health, your wife's health, your kids' health, and your family's health, in addition to, obviously all your Immunotech family?
John, thank you for referring to me as a world's leading authority. I take issue with that. I'm a pretty bright guy, but there are people that are so much smarter than me. What I'll accept is I'm probably the world's best known authority on glutathione. But, when I spent time with Bunos and Kongshavn and Droga, really, honestly, I felt like a school child there. They were just at another level. I'm just really, really good at getting the word out there. So the largest authority, maybe not the smartest authority. And what this did, this whole glutathione, it opened up a whole new world of natural approaches to treating humans, which I never had. This is a long and winding road, and it's littered with really bad ideas. And I look at the natural products out there, and I'm sorry, people are going to be mad at me for saying these. There's a lot of junk out there. And, but scattered among the junk, there are some absolute jewels, and we need to be able to sift those out and bring them to the forefront so that the medical community can take advantage of those. I can absolutely appreciate the views of people that are in favor of natural treatments, but I can appreciate the importance of regulatory bodies like the FDA. Don't get me wrong. I don't love the FDA. I've got big issues with them. But when I'm asked the questions, people will make a false assumption. They'll ask a question: do you believe in drugs or do you believe in natural products? That's ridiculous. There are problems on either side. I don't entirely agree with either the pharma industry or the natural products industry, because when money is involved and profits are involved and business is involved, all sides of the fence become biased, intentionally or unintentionally. And that's why we have to stick to the science, both in the pharma industry, which gets slack sometimes, and in natural products industry, which the only way they're going to gain credibility is by focusing on the science. And that's where we shine. That's where we shine. And that's why I am so proud to have spent the majority of my adult life associated with Immunotech.
Dr. Gutman, what you say is so true because, there's so many things out there in retail and on the internet, network marketing, et cetera, that make erroneous claims. And I know how you feel. I know how John feels. I know how I feel for that matter, that, somebody tells me Immunical does something that you and I know it can't. Okay. As for what it does, I have just as much problem with them as I do some of the charlatans out there doing similar things, right? We want to keep it to the facts. And, one of the terms that keeps coming up in the scientific world is evidence-based science. And the fact that we have, we could stack the science behind me here, and I'm 6'2.5". Okay, and if I stood up, the papers would probably be over my head about what's written about Immunical over these last 45 years. So, Dr. Gutman, once again, just like John, I want to thank you on behalf of all of these people, both the ones here and the ones that aren't here, that all appreciate you. And you know what? To me, you are the world's leading authority on glutathione. Okay, and to the Immunitech world. Okay. So wear that mantle proudly. But I know you've got some books that can help these people to really understand and simplify this very complex scientific subject for them. So where would they get your books if they so desire?
Thanks, John. I'm just going to take advantage here, and maybe I could just flash something on the screen. It'll just be easier for everybody. Can you all see that there?
Yep.
Yeah. So, for sure, the book is something that it's been an ongoing project for over 20 years. It's always evolving, always getting bigger, because the field of glutathione is growing literally every month. It's impossible to keep on top of. But this is my latest book in English and in Spanish, and I'm trying to get it out in French as well. And it's so many of the questions that John Molson and we spend so much time answering an infinite amount of times. I guarantee you the vast majority of these questions and more can be found quite easily in this book. If you have a question about diabetes and glutathione, and cancer and glutathione, and Parkinson's and glutathione, and is it good for this and is it good for that, it's pretty up to date. I think you're going to find your answers, and not just the answers, but the original research that demonstrated the validation of glutathione in these health challenges are all referenced there. So for the doctors, it's really cool. They can, or the researchers, they can flip to the back of each chapter and look up the original references, which when you try to read them, it can be awfully dry, but some people are kind of masochistic that way, including myself. So the book can be accessed. You see that website there, glutathione.org, pretty easy. And just click, there'll be a number of flags here, country flags. Click on your country and it will take you to the order page for that country. The other ways that I like to get information out is I have a Facebook page. I know a lot of people cringe when they hear Facebook. I understand. I'm not really using it as a social media. I'm using it as an educational media. So whenever I come across something cool in the research about glutathione, I'll frequently post it on Facebook. So you can keep on top of the current science on glutathione by visiting my Facebook page. I do have to apologize in advance. I have almost 20,000 followers. So answering questions on that Facebook page, it gets a little bit onerous and difficult. So you may not necessarily get an answer from me. And if you do, there might be a bit of a delay. And finally, on YouTube, I'm continually adding different videos to the YouTube page, Dr. Jimmy Gutman. And again, those will serve as good educational pieces for all of you insomniacs or anybody else who finds himself getting bored staying at home during these COVID days. So just some more ways of sharing the information.
Well, and last point, once again, Dr. Gutman is a guy who's very responsive. Now, once again, he's also very busy, as is John Molson. So if you write to them, don't expect an answer in 5 minutes, because these guys have lives, they have families, they've got Immunotech, et cetera. But you always will get some answer back in a reasonable amount of time. Okay. So to reach Dr. Gutman, J for Jimmy, Gutman, Gutman at immunotech.com. You all know his name, certainly, but just write to him, okay? And, you will get an answer back. He doesn't prescribe. Let me just do this for you, Dr. Gutman. He doesn't prescribe, so don't ask him, to prescribe something. He's not your doctor, okay? But if it's in reference to Immunical and your usage of it, he will give you, once again, the evidence-based science that exists. Okay. And he's been extremely helpful to me and my family over the years, and friends that have different things going on, et cetera, et cetera. So, once again, Dr. Gutman, any last word?
No, let's just keep this venue up. This is great fun, and I love it.
Great. Well, thank you, Doctor. Appreciate it. Okay. Hey,